The bike rolled to a stop almost by itself. I didn't brake hard. I didn't need to. My legs slowed, my hands loosened, and the tires whispered against the asphalt until silence took over. The engine ticked softly as it cooled, like it was breathing out after a long run. That's when I saw the car, parked crooked, half on the gravel, half on the curb. Not mine, not hers. Dark paint, still warm, a thin film of moisture clinging to the hood. Whoever drove it hadn't been gone long. I stayed on the bike for a moment, just looking. The house stood quiet behind the fence. Lights on, curtains drawn. Everything looked normal enough to fool a neighbor, a passerby, anyone who didn't know where to look. I swung my leg over and set the bike on its stand. The gate creaked when I pushed it open. I slipped inside and closed it carefully behind me, easing the latch so it wouldn't click. The yard smelled of wet grass and oil. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once, then stopped. I didn't go straight to the door. Near the shed, half hidden behind stacked firewood, I found what I was looking for. A length of old timber, rough, heavy, splintered at one end. I tested its weight in my hands. Solid. Honest. I stepped into the shadow beside the house and waited. From inside, water ran. A shower. Steady. Careless. The sound carried through the open bathroom window, mixed with muffled movement and the faint echo of a man humming to himself. Not her. I leaned my shoulder against the wall and counted my breaths. Slow in, slower out. Then the water stopped. A minute passed, maybe two. I heard footsteps. A door opened somewhere inside, then another. Voices, low, indistinct. Laughter that didn't belong in my house. The front door opened. He stepped out like he owned the place. Barefoot. Damp hair. A towel slung over one shoulder. Keys in his hand. He turned back inside for a second. Said something I couldn't hear. Something light. Something intimate. Then he closed the door. That was when I moved. I didn't rush. I stepped out of the dark and watched him turn, confusion blooming on his face just as understanding caught up. I swung the wood low. It connected with his knees, hard enough to buckle him, but not enough to shatter. He cried out, a raw sound torn from deep inside, and collapsed forward, hands slapping uselessly against the stone path. He tried to crawl. I stepped closer and brought the wood down again, this time across his face. Not the head, never the head. The cheek, the jaw. Enough to knock him sideways, enough to end the shouting and replace it with a wet, stunned groan. He hit the ground and stayed there. I worked carefully after that. There was no rage left in it. Just focus. Precision. I broke what needed breaking. Arms first. Wrists. Elbows. A methodical rhythm, like dismantling something complicated but poorly made. Legs after that. Ankles, knees. Places that would never quite forgive him. He screamed when he could breathe, sobbed when he couldn't, and eventually just made small animal sounds that meant nothing at all. I avoided his ribs, his neck, anything that would kill him. I wasn't there to end his life. I was there to change it. When I was done, I stepped back and listened. Somewhere, far off, a siren wailed. Faint at first, then closer. I dropped the wood where it lay and walked back through the gate. My hands were steady. My heart was calm. I mounted the bike and rolled away just as the sound of help grew louder behind me. By the time I circled back, the street was blazing with light. Red and blue washed over the houses, the trees, the quiet lives that had nothing to do with what happened on my doorstep. An ambulance idled near the curb. Police cars blocked the road. Neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering, pointing. I ran toward the house like a man who knew nothing. "What happened?" I shouted, breathless, wild-eyed. "That's my home. Where's my wife?" A police officer held up a hand, trying to slow me down, but I pushed past him just enough to see. The body lay at the threshold. Broken. Twisted. Alive. "Who is that?" I demanded. "Why is he on my porch?" Someone said a name I pretended to hear for the first time. My wife's name came next. I shouted it, over and over, until she appeared behind an officer, wrapped in a robe, her face pale and empty. She looked at the man on the ground, and then at me. And something unreadable passed between us. The police tried to calm me. Voices overlapped. Questions stacked on top of questions. They told me they'd received a call earlier. Someone reported an assault. No suspect. No weapon found. The victim had been discovered crawling toward the door, barely conscious. They knelt beside him, checking vitals, speaking into radios. An officer looked at me carefully. "Sir, can you step aside for a moment?" They asked me to check myself for blood. I laughed. Right there, under the lights, I pulled off my jacket, then my shirt, turned my pockets inside out, held my hands up. "See anything?" I asked. Because I don't. They didn't like my tone. I could tell. I picked up a bottle from the step, mine, and took a long drink. Someone told me to stop. I didn't. That was when the cuffs came out. "You're under arrest on suspicion of aggravated assault," the officer said, reciting it like a prayer he'd memorized long ago. "Anything you say?" "I know," I said, smiling. "I've seen television." They walked me to the car while the ambulance doors closed behind us. As we pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of my house, of her, standing alone under the flashing lights, watching me disappear. I leaned back in the seat and finally allowed myself to breathe. They didn't take me straight to the station. First, there was the ride. The patrol car smelled like disinfectant and old fabric, a mix of sweat and something sharp, meant to erase other people's mistakes. The officer driving didn't say a word. The one in the passenger seat kept glancing at me in the side mirror, like he was waiting for me to confess, just to make the night easier. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes. The cuffs weren't tight, but they reminded me they were there every time the car turned. Streetlights slid past in steady intervals, and for a moment I imagined I was just another passenger heading somewhere unpleasant but temporary, like a dentist's office or a funeral. Instead, they handed me over. Different men, no uniforms, thick jackets, heavy shoulders, the kind of people who didn't ask questions because they already believed the answers. One of them looked at me sideways as we drove. "You really messed someone up," he said, not accusing, not impressed, just stating a fact. I shrugged as much as the cuffs allowed. "That happens sometimes," he snorted. "Doesn't mean I blame you." That surprised me more than it should have. The building they took me to wasn't dramatic. No towering gates, no echoing corridors, just concrete, fluorescent lights, and a fatigue that seemed baked into the walls. They put me in a small interview room and told me to wait. I waited. I tried to sleep. Every time I drifted off, someone opened the door, asked me to confirm my name, asked if I needed water, asked me to sit up straight, asked nothing at all and just stared. Hours passed like that. Eventually, a man walked in who didn't look tired. He was neatly dressed, tie loosened just enough to suggest long nights without admitting weakness. He sat across from me and placed a folder on the table with exaggerated care. "My name is Martin Kessler," he said, I'm the detective assigned to your case." I smiled. Lucky me. He didn't return it. "You're being investigated for aggravated assault resulting in severe bodily harm," he continued. "The victim was found on your property with multiple fractures." "That's terrible," I said. "People should really be more careful." His eyes flicked up, sharp, curious. "You declined legal counsel," he said. I did. "Why?" "Because lawyers turn conversations into performances," I replied. "And I hate theater." He leaned back slightly. "Then let's talk plainly." Finally. He asked where I'd been that night. I told him. I said I'd been returning home from a delivery run. Long drive, late hour. I mentioned the city. Far enough away to sound inconvenient, close enough to be believable. I said I'd followed an ambulance most of the way back after spotting it on the highway. He raised an eyebrow. "You expect me to believe that?" "I don't expect anything," I said. "I'm just telling you what happened." He opened the folder and slid a paper toward me. "We have a victim with injuries consistent with a sustained beating. No sign of forced entry. No witnesses who saw anyone else enter or leave." "Busy night," I said. "People miss things." He studied me for a long moment. "Do you have proof you were out of town?" "Yes," I said. "Delivery logs, timestamps, fuel receipt if you really want to get romantic about it." He tapped the table with a pen. "Those can be fabricated." "Everything can," I said, "including assumptions." That earned me a thin smile. The tension in the room thickened. Not anger, something colder, a professional irritation. He wanted me to slip, to get emotional, to defend myself too loudly. I didn't give him that. After a while, he closed the folder. "We're not done," he said. "But for now, you're free to go. You'll need to sign the arrest record." "Of course," I said. "Wouldn't want any paperwork unfinished." They let me out just before dawn. The house felt wrong when I walked back in. Too quiet. Too clean. Like it was holding its breath. My wife was waiting. She started apologizing the moment she saw me. Words spilled out in a rush. Confusion, fear, regret. She said she never meant for things to go this far. She said she loved me. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I told her I was tired, that I needed a lawyer, that we'd talk later. Later never means what people think it does. After she went to bed, I sat alone and made a call. The hospital answered after a few rings. I asked about the man they'd brought in. They wouldn't give details, so I asked for his wife instead. Her name was Laura. She arrived that afternoon, eyes red, hands shaking. The moment she saw my wife, something inside her snapped. She accused. She demanded. She refused to listen. My wife tried to explain, tried to justify. It didn't matter. Laura talked about her husband's future in practical terms. Work he'd never do again, hands that might not hold, legs that might not walk the same. There was no drama in her voice, just calculation. When she left, she thanked me for calling. I offered her coffee. She declined. After the door closed, the kitchen felt smaller. We talked about liars, about faithless people, about how marriages rot quietly long before they collapse. My wife kept leaving the room and coming back, like she was hoping distance would change the shape of things. Finally, I walked her to the door. She cried, told me she loved me. I told her to pack. Later, I dragged a pile of her things into the yard. Clothes, bedding, pieces of a life that didn't fit anymore. I poured gasoline slowly, deliberately. She begged me to stop. I didn't. When the flames caught, they burned fast and bright, and as I stood there watching, I realized something important. The truth hadn't destroyed my life. It had simply finished the job. The fire died quicker than I expected. Flames chewed through fabric and foam, hissed when they met something synthetic, then collapsed into a blackened, steaming mess. Smoke hung low in the yard, clinging to my clothes, my hair, my hands. I stood there long after it was over, staring at what was left, until the cold finally pushed me back inside. I locked the door. Inside, the house echoed. Drawers stood open, closets half empty. The places where her things used to be looked cleaner than the rest, like scars after stitches are removed. I washed my hands, twice. The smell stayed. I tried calling a lawyer. One number went to voicemail. Another rang until it stopped. A third office answered with a recording about business hours and emergencies that didn't include people like me. I sat at the kitchen table and waited for something to happen. It did, just not all at once. The phone buzzed with messages I didn't open. A neighbor knocked and asked if everything was all right. I said yes. A patrol car rolled past slowly, like it was checking whether the world still existed where it had left it. When night came, I didn't turn on the lights. I kept thinking about the man on my porch, about the way he'd looked at me right before the first blow landed, how certainty drains from a person in stages. First confusion, then fear, then nothing at all. He had learned the truth the hard way, and so had I. Sleep came in pieces. I woke to imagined sirens, to imagined footsteps, to the memory of my wife's voice saying she loved me like love was something you could hand back after you were done using it. In the morning, I went through the house one last time. I packed only what I needed: clothes, documents, cash. I left behind everything that tied me to explanations. On the kitchen counter, I placed my phone face down and turned it off. Outside, the sky was clear and empty. I didn't look back when I left. People would say I ran. They'd be wrong. I didn't disappear because I was afraid. I disappeared because there was nothing left worth staying for. No version of myself that belonged to that address, that marriage, that story people would tell about me once they decided who the villain was. Some truths don't ask for justice. They just demand distance. The road didn't feel like freedom at first. It felt like delay. Every mile put space between me and the house, but it didn't erase the weight of what had happened there. Towns blurred together. Motels looked the same. Faces changed. Questions didn't. I paid in cash, kept conversations short, learned how to look like a man who belonged nowhere in particular. News travels even when you don't listen for it. In a diner outside a place whose name I never bothered to remember, a television murmured above the counter. A local report. A man hospitalized after a violent assault. Severe injuries, long recovery, no suspects formally charged. The screen showed my street, my porch. They blurred his face. They didn't need to blur mine. I finished my coffee and left before the waitress could ask if I wanted more. Weeks passed. I learned the rhythm of being gone, how to wake early, how to move before curiosity woke up around me, how to avoid patterns. I took work that paid daily. Jobs where no one cared about yesterday or tomorrow. Physical labor helped. It kept my hands busy and my thoughts quiet. One evening, I checked an old email account from a public computer. There were messages from my wife at first, then longer gaps, then silence. There was one from the detective. He said the case was still open, that inconsistencies bothered him. That disappearing didn't look good. I closed the browser without replying. I never found out exactly when the other man learned the whole truth about the lies, the promises, the story my wife had told him. Maybe she confessed. Maybe he put it together while staring at a hospital ceiling, unable to move, finally understanding what he'd stepped into. It didn't matter. Understanding comes too late more often than it comes in time. I heard he survived. That was enough. Sometimes, at night, I imagine him remembering my face. The moment before everything changed. The realization that some doors don't open into freedom, they open into consequences. As for me, I became someone else. Not a new man, just a quieter one. One who didn't believe in endings that wrapped themselves up neatly. One who knew that justice and disappearance aren't opposites. They're just different ways of stepping out of a story before it consumes you. I didn't vanish because I was guilty. I vanished because the truth had already done its damage. And because once you understand how fragile the lives we build really are, staying feels far more dangerous than leaving.